Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is the Florida Agritourism Association's webinar series. This is part of our 2024 series. We are very excited to welcome a very strong expert in lodging, a topic that many of you have expressed a very strong interest and have questions. I think our speaker today will be able to address many of your concerns and issues and answer questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce Stephen von Bodingbug. I'm probably mispronouncing your name, Stephen, so I appreciate your corrections. But he has been with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation for a very long time. He now leads the Division of Hotels and Restaurants, but he started over 26 years ago as a lodging and food inspector in Tampa, and then worked his way up to district manager, deputy bureau chief, and now then deputy division director, and now is the division director at the Department of Business and Professional Regulations. He is truly an expert when it comes to various levels of management within the department, including the inspection program, regulatory implementation, the personnel investigations, policy creation, Food and Drug Administration, regional representation, legislative analysis, rule application for food safety and lodging principles, which is what we're talking about today. And he is a proud graduate of the business school at Florida State University. So with that, Stephen, I pass it off to you. But I do want Sarah to chime in real quickly about the Q&A, how we're going to handle that today.
Absolutely. So Stephen wants this to be a good discussion. He's very happy to answer questions. So there's a chat box at the bottom. If you want to let us know if you have a question, if you want to drop it in there, then I will keep an eye on it. And other than that, if we could all stay muted so that we can hear him. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yes, wonderful. Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you for such a great introduction. You know, you did a great job on pronouncing my name. It's von Bodingbug. It's long and you know, what can I say? It's kind of a mouthful. But thank you. I'm very happy to be talking with you today. This is really a very interesting topic and how it applies to hotels and restaurants, the regulatory environment, and tourism as a whole. I'll go ahead and start out giving you an overview of the Division of Hotels and Restaurants. I'll talk a little bit about the different roles that we play. I'll also try to talk to you as much as I know about agritourism, but especially how public lodging and food service applies to that as you conduct that on your property. Should you have questions and answers, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I'll be watching that as well. And I certainly want to be giving you my contact information too. We're very proud of our licensing processes here at DBPR. We make them we try to make them painless, easy, and very attainable. So with that being said, I hope there's plenty of things that I'm able to tell you that you'd like to hear and that it turns out to be a benefit to you. So the Division of Hotels and Restaurants is with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. And so what the division primarily does is license and inspect public lodging establishments and public food service establishments in the state. And that's throughout the whole state. And so we are the people that you would typically look at and consider like your Board of Health Inspectors, your health inspectors for restaurants, and your health inspectors for public lodging establishments. So it's not a bad way to think of us, but along those lines, it's not necessarily how our titles are created. But we do administer this program statewide. We have 7 district offices, and whether you're in Miami, Key West, or you're all the way over in Pensacola, we really strive to make our regulations, our policies, and our procedures the same, manage as closely to the same as we can, despite the differences in the different geographic areas and how things evolve. But so we have even regulatory compliance across the board without too many hiccups that we're not in control of. So we do have the 7 district offices. We have approximately 300 people in the field. That's primarily our inspectors, our senior inspectors, the people that have to visit hotels, motels, and restaurants all day long. We also do food trucks. We do stadiums. We do temporary food service events. It's quite a mix on the food service side. When you get to public lodging, it's a little bit more defined. And I can read through some of those classifications with you. But you certainly have your traditional hotel, motel, bed and breakfast, transient apartments, and vacation rentals that are all your typical transient type of occupancies. Then you can go over and move to a different type of occupancy, which is a non-transient. And that's more associated with the apartments that you lease to people for long-term, like 6 months or more. Apartment complexes utilize this as well, and others on a smaller basis. So our people all day long are inspecting licensed accounts. If they're not licensed yet, we're going out and we're visiting with operators after they've applied for the license or they've gone through our application process to make sure they're ready to go. They're ready to receive their license, their opening inspection, if you will, and then we move them along from there. We do conduct inspections that are mandatory on public food service and public lodging establishments. On restaurants themselves, they're inspected anywhere between 1 time to 4 times a year. That's associated with the license that they're given in order to operate. That number is based upon your risk of the food service establishment that you operate. So a very low risk establishment would operate at like a level 1, which would be 1 inspection a year. As you begin to operate more complex food services, like the cooking of raw animal food, cooling of it, and reheating of it, you get into what we call as a more complicated, riskier food process. And so those require 2 inspections a year. The 3 and the 4 is associated with non-compliant activity or foodborne illness. And so for the sake of this discussion, I really don't think that that's necessarily applicable. So you're looking at an annual inspection of 1 or 2 a year. Those are unannounced. On the public lodging side for transient occupancy, you are looking, sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought here for a minute. But I will stop for just a moment. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to circle back a little bit more on public lodging establishment, which is exactly what I'm here to talk about. So let me read everybody what a definition of a public lodging establishment is. A transient public lodging establishment, and this is all per statutory definition in Florida Statute Chapter 509. Okay, means any unit, group of units, dwelling, building, or group of buildings within a single complex of buildings, which is rented to guests more than 3 times in a calendar year for periods of less than 30 days or 1 calendar month, whichever is less, or which is advertised or held out to the public as a place regularly rented to guests. So it's my understanding that that people in their farms would like to offer public lodging establishments as well. I think that is some of the things that Lena and I spoke about early on. And I would say that that's certainly an opportunity for any of you. You will just need to apply for a license. And so while it might be on a farm, and while that's very different, it's still, considered a public lodging establishment, and it's still considered something that needs to be licensed. And so a lot of times these different type of lodging establishments are specialty, but I could certainly see that associated with agritourism and the take that it would go on those. But it being properly licensed by the state is what the minimum requirement is. So we have different classifications, and the classifications are identified in statute. And so with that being said, I'm going to read through you our different classifications, so you get an idea of the different types that you could fall within. Okay. You're going to be classified as a hotel, motel, non-transient apartment, bed and breakfast inn, timeshare project, or vacation rental. Okay. A hotel is any public lodging establishment containing sleeping room accommodations for 25 or more guests and providing the services generally provided by a hotel and recognized as a hotel in the community in which it is situated or by the industry. Okay. Helps you think of a traditional hotel, not a motel, in the sense that you might see it within a city or a public place. A motel is any public lodging establishment which offers rental units with an exit to the outside of each rental unit, daily or weekly rates, off-street parking for each unit, a central office on the property, the specified hours of operation, a bathroom or connecting bathroom for which each rental unit and at least 6 rental units and which is recognized as a motel in the community in which it is situated in the industry. So there's your typical hotel and motel. Vacation rentals are a little bit different in the sense that it recognizes properties that are individually owned, and whether it be a condominium or whether it be a single family home. And you can apply for vacation rental. And remember, this is transient occupancy versus non-transient occupancy. You're not renting this unit out long-term to people. If you are, that's a discussion about non-transient occupancy. If you're renting it out short-term, you're holding it out as a place regularly available to guests, and they can come and stay on your farm. Then a vacation rental could certainly be a consideration of yours. If the home, the building itself is individually owned, then I would think that it falls clearly within the vacation rental classification. It can also help, though, in the sense of should you sell a certain part of your property or you deed it to someone else, it's quite possible they could have a licensed vacation rental on your property that could also go towards your business and the type of thing that you're looking to do. All right, I'm going to talk about a couple more opportunities here in which that might fall into a classification need and help for you on a farm itself. And that's going to be a transient apartment. We don't see too many of those anymore, and a bed and breakfast inn. So a transient apartment is a building or complex of buildings in which more than 25% of the units are advertised or held out to the public as available for transient occupancy. A bed and breakfast inn is a family home structure with no more than 15 sleeping rooms, which has been modified to serve as a transient public lodging establishment, which provides the accommodation and meals generally offered by a bed and breakfast inn, and which is recognized as a bed and breakfast inn in the community in which it is situated or by the hospitality industry. So in the past, as I've gone through my time in the fields and seeing the different variations of the type of things that people license, and I'll tell you the time that we visited farms, we certainly know that Ocala has, and that particular part of the state has become of great interest to many and associated with doing more and more things on their farm and on their property. Ideally, we're going to need for a public lodging establishment to fit into one of those categories. And I imagine it's possible that you could have like a 1-unit motel. I would think for the purposes of what the people on this call are trying to do, you would either fall within a vacation rental that you would receive a license for. Vacation rental is the one classification that you do not get an annual inspection with. Those are a little different. The licensing is extraordinarily straightforward, and you can apply for the vacation rental license online. It's our fastest growing segment of public lodging licenses. It's grown over the past 3 or 4 years. It's practically doubled in size from near 20,000 to as much as 40,000 licensed accounts. And so with that being said, you can have multiple licenses. You can have multiple units on one license, or you can only have 1 unit on 1 license. But I would think that could be a method, something that would be helpful to you and your business operations, if not something similar to a bed and breakfast inn. When you, and I say the bed and breakfast inn, periodically see that on large homesteads, and I say farm-related property, because you typically tends to be a structure or two, and a lot of times people like to engage into the business of serving breakfast as well, or serving meals and serving maybe alcoholic beverages or whatever else you may be doing in the morning or evening. So there's a few different options there for anyone, and I'm happy to take your questions. With that being said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the type of requirements that you need for a public lodging establishment. So one, know that it can be, and it oftentimes is, inspected by the fire department in your local municipality or your county. A lot of that has to do with the fact that it's transient occupancy. We see that vary from county by county and from municipality by municipality. So sometimes people are very interested, sometimes they are not, but it's completely well within their right to do so. And oftentimes people like to, the municipalities like to have people go out and inspect, since you're going to be having guests staying there overnight and paying for accommodations. And with that being said, you have to look for things like, and you have to have in your units hearing impaired smoke detectors. Oftentimes that's a portable smoke detector you can buy and give to people that are hearing impaired, and then in turn they return it back to you upon the end of their stay. You certainly have your normal smoke detectors that are inside the units. The more popular and reliable ones are hardwired nowadays. There might still be some applicability for battery powered ones. And you certainly have to keep your linens, your towels, your washcloths, all of that in very good condition. All those type of things are inspected, in addition to the cleanliness of the unit. Should you get into the purpose of allowing people to cook inside their unit, or providing clean cookware and dishware, we have something that's called a notice of sanitization to guests. And what that is it's a notice to the public that basically says these dishes were cleaned in a household sink, not necessarily according to public food service standards. Realize that we do license the public food service that's inside a bed and breakfast, in addition to their public lodging establishment. And so, like, one of the things that they have to do is to be able to properly sanitize, wash, rinse, and sanitize their dishware and their glassware for their guests when they're on site. So that applies a little bit to someone's unit, but at the same time too, we do allow it to be done in a household capacity. Those are the big basic pieces associated with the requirements for a public lodging license. When we come and inspect, we look for the guest registry. We make sure you're operating within classification. If you say that you're operating in a transient establishment, we are typically, you're interested in operating a transient establishment. I think that we would just mostly be looking and contacting you associated with inspecting your units. We would not want to inspect your units when people are in them, right? We would do it when people are not there and your guests are not there. But should we get a complaint from a guest, it's not unheard of for us to come out, deal with the issue with the guest, and with the management as well. So that's a very big and broad overview of our role with public lodging establishments and the people that do these inspections and investigate any complaints that people might have, like, the unit was dirty, and or my sheets were torn, or you can just kind of go on and on with the type of things you think people might not be pleased with. We will investigate those complaints, and we will come out and see how we can bring resolution to the problem. But that's it in a nutshell. The licenses, I would say, are really quite reasonable. I will see if I can pull up a report here associated with the fees, and I can talk a little bit more about those.
Yes, there was, this is Sarah. There was a question about the fee structure for licensing.
Okay, very good. Let me, and I'm seeing one right here from Sarah Luther. What is the fee structure for licensing? And let me pull a sheet out. Bear with me, please. And I will go through some more specifics of our license fees. So when we're talking about transient lodging, hotels and motels, it's the fee is based on the number of units. So should you have as little as 1 unit, your basic fee would be $170. And then you would, and additionally, you would pay a unit fee of 10, a HEP fee of 10. Your total fee would be $190. That's how much we charge for the license every year. That's how much it would be charged up front for your first year. And we would charge a $50 application fee associated with processing your license. That's basically the fee structure. So as you move up from there, and please let me know if you want me to expand to some of the really high categories of, like, 100, 200, 300, 400, over 500 units. I'll probably say that y'all are probably speaking of something, either 1 unit or somewhere between 2 and 25 units. Okay. So if you're looking between 2 and 25 units, you have a basic fee of $170, a unit fee of $20 per increment, and a HEP fee of $10. So your total fee is $200 associated with 2 to 25 units. And whether you have 25 units or 2 units, the cost of that license is the same. It's $200. They jump up in increments of 10, or then they jump up to 15. But that's basically the fee structure. When you get into, those are hotels, motels, and that type of thing. When you get into transient apartments, the fee structure is a little bit different. You drop down in price for a number of units to $145 associated for a transient apartment. 2 to 25 units is $155 for a transient apartment. And then I'll give you a price too for vacation rentals. So if you're talking about a vacation rental and a single license, it's $170. We have a 1 unit basic fee of $150, a unit fee of 10, a HEP fee of 10, and a total fee of $170. So should you apply for a vacation rental license for 1 unit, and you were to pay $170, you would also pay the additional $50 associated with the application processing. And so the good thing about the vacation rental license is, 1, it could be very applicable to the type of business and business activity that you do out on your farms. But 2, it's a very easy license to get, in the sense that you can apply for it online and you can get it electronically without an inspector coming and visiting you. So it's just important that we look at the different kind of classifications that are associated with public lodging and licenses, and that people are able to operate within them according to the business activity that they engage in.
So another question we had is, does your department require licensing for Airbnb locations? Would that fall under your vacation rentals?
Yes, we do. And along those lines, know that Airbnb has evolved. And so Airbnb is what we call an advertising platform. We also look at VRBO as an advertising platform, Expedia, HomeAway. There's a number of them now that are what we consider advertising platform. What Airbnb doesn't necessarily do, all right, and they might have gotten into it with some of their business model, is own everything that they advertise, right? It's really individual owners who are using them as a platform to advertise, to book, secure, and to do all the other type of things with the business end of it. And so what we license is an individual operator. So should one of you decide that you have a home, or you want to build a home on your property and you want to rent it as a dwelling transient vacation rental, that would be perfectly acceptable. You would just need to make sure that you found your local you found what your local requirements would be associated with a fire, and for the building code, you could apply for your license, and you could receive it automatically in the mail without necessarily ever seeing us. So Airbnb is what we typically relate to vacation rentals. That it tends to be how a vacation rental is advertised, and it tends to be how vacation rentals advertised, and how they book their stays. So you have condominiums that are oftentimes vacation rentals. You know what condominiums look like, and then you have the single dwellings. We talked about those as well.
Another question we had was, and this applies to probably several of our members, they have farm worker housing. Can that be used for guest lodging as well? And if so, does that require licensing?
I would think certainly if you were to take farm worker housing and turn it into guest housing, yes, it would need to be a license. It would be a public lodging establishment. I'll tell you, farm worker housing or migrant guidelines is not something that I'm probably most familiar with. But I would think you would be taking the same home unit, if you will, and maybe you do change it a little bit, maybe you don't, and then you make it available for somebody else. You renting it to someone as a guest to come and stay with you would be something that needs a license.
Okay. What all activities that we traditionally consider agritourism does your agency regulate?
Well,
what about gathering halls, wedding venues?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think wedding venues helps. What are some other agritourism things that you could help point me to? I certainly have those.
So he mentioned, for instance, a U-Pick farm that wants to sell hot dogs and strawberry milkshakes. Would there be food licensing required for there?
Yeah.
Milkshakes.
And the food stands are regulated by you, correct? You said that earlier.
Yes, that is correct. And I think there are some statutory provisions that Lena and I talked about a little while ago that does allow some food service on the agritourism property, right? But as a matter of principle, bringing guests on your location and selling them and serving food does require a license. And so think about it in the sense of a wedding venue. A wedding venue can just be that, right? In the sense that it's a place where everybody goes. They have the wedding, they have the service. You can have a reception. Maybe you have buildings there, maybe you do not. So it really just kind of depends on what you're trying to structure out there. But we do see a lot of people that sort of have like barns or pole barns, for a lack of a better term. They might have big pavilions and things of that nature. To where they do some of their weddings. So I'll talk a little bit about weddings first. They usually, if you're going to serve food to the public, and a wedding is included, you have a catered event where you have a large group of people, and then there's a contract involved. The people that serve the food and prepare the food need to be licensed by the division. We have licensed caterers. We also have licensed restaurants and food service establishments that cater as part of their business. And so as long as they have a license with the Division of Hotels and Restaurants, you should be good along those lines with them being properly licensed by us. So somewhere along the way, a contractual agreement is made by you and them, or by you, them, and whomever your guests are, the people getting married, that are going to come out to your location and provide and serve the food. And so that's probably the important thing to take away from there associated with weddings. They need to be licensed as public food service establishments when you engage them. Should you want to have a public food service establishment on your property to help with caterers, to help give equipment associated for caterers so they can come out and have more of a venue to use, like a catering kitchen, we could license you. We could give you a license for that food service, and in turn, you would have a licensed public food service on the property too. So a couple different options there for you to think about. That's weddings. U-Pick farms, we certainly don't get into the picking of fruits or vegetables, but we certainly do address milkshakes and like hot dog stands. So we do have licenses. They're called hot dog cart licenses that are very minimal, associated with just serving hot dogs. They're pretty closely associated with that silver looking cart with the umbrella that so many of us have seen around the United States. We have mobile food licenses too. We can also give a license associated with a very small food service establishment, but realize that all public food service establishments have a basic minimum set of requirements. And so you're going to have a restroom, at least one, available to your employees, right, and to your guests with hot and cold running water. If you're talking about putting public food service on your farm, I would say it's important to stop and take a look at one, how you're disposing of your waste and your waste liquid. If it's on a septic tank, a package plant, if you're hooked up to city sewer certainly makes it the easiest. But once you start putting an impact on the septic system or a package plant, the Department of Environmental Protection or the Department of Health would need to stop and actually take a look at it. And you would need to look at your well too. So I would think all of your well activities associated with the public lodging establishment or the food service establishment has to be tested. And so where some of you might not have a well right now, or it might have wells of your own and you don't necessarily test them, that would become a requirement for you because you're engaging in regulated activity on your property. But that should give you a good general idea of what the minimum requirements are. You know, we do license snack stands, for lack of a better term. So when you think about the size of how big this place can or can't be, if you wanted to enclose it, it doesn't have to be big, but you do have to have a hand sink that's plumbed with hot and cold running water, a 3-compartment sink to wash, rinse, and sanitize all of your utensils and dishes and glasses and dishware, access to a mop sink somewhere on the property, and the kitchen has to be separate and apart from the service of the food in and of itself. But those are I would say, the primary areas for public food service that you would be looking at on farms.
So Steve, I wanted to pivot the conversation more back to lodging, since this is what this webinar is about. And we have a question from a member about camping on agricultural land and related regulations. Like, what would be any regulations?
Okay. Camping on land, I truly don't, we don't license campgrounds. So I will start with that. So should somebody decide they want to pull an RV onto your property or pitch a tent, I've never been glamping. I've seen kind of pictures of it and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like fun, but it sort of looks like a hybrid too at the same time of kind of permanent and not so permanent. Those are not things that we regulate. And so know that we regulate people coming and staying in a structure that's recognized by the Florida Building Code. And so along those lines, those are the type of structures that we license for public lodging establishments, and not camping or campgrounds. I do know the Florida Department of Health licenses campgrounds, and now and RV parks. What their threshold is for regulation or number of units, I'm not certain.
Wonderful. Yeah, you and I discussed that there's a whole nother statute that regulates RVs, and we know that it's a county by county decision regarding how many RVs can be on a property.
Probably so. And I imagine the next thing I would think about along those lines is, you know, and I would think a logical question would be is what's your impact going to be on your waste system?
Correct.
And you know, it's they're all probably going to want to need to hook up to water and sewer, and yeah, so probably plenty has to be worked out with the city or the county there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading a point here. It says one of the purposes of agritourism statute is to remove duplication of regulation. How does DBPR have regulation if we're offering farm stays on a bona fide farming operation? I don't necessarily have too deep of a response for you along those lines, Mr. Walker. What is offering a farm stay on a bona fide farming operation? How would that be different than, I imagine I would say, coming and staying at a public lodging establishment? Maybe one's agritourism, maybe one is not. I can read up a little bit more on the agritourism statute, But I ask you, does the agritourism statute discuss people coming and spending the night on your farm and paying for it? So I would say along those lines, I think that that's very much so a public lodging activity that would be regulated by the division. Reading another one here, given the special status of farms in general, in addition to agritourism, how does a county governing authority factor into the granting of a license? So county governing authorities have to do with zoning, mostly, right? And when you talk about public lodging establishments in the state of Florida, it's expressly preempted to the state. And that's this department, and then that's this division. Should you stop and watch a little bit about the discussion that goes on around the state regarding vacation rentals and whether or not they should be more closely regulated or less regulated, or left up to local government control or left up to state control? That's a hot topic for the past 12, 13 years in the legislature. And they're actually debating it right now. I mean, I don't necessarily know if it's this particular moment of the day, but there are vacation rental bills out there that are currently being debated back and forth about what is the best regulation associated with these type of establishments, because they're popping up all over the place. So with that being said, the county governing authority factors into it is that they can have you zoned for one thing and you might want to do another. That's probably the biggest thing that I would think about. County government is also going to talk to you about your business tax receipts. And it's also going to probably talk to you about waste disposal systems associated with the Department of Health. They come into play there as well. So that's the role of the counties as I understand them. And I'll be happy to talk to them a little bit more about those should you have any questions. Is it okay if I keep working my way down the question list? Okay, good. We generally, and this is from Mr. Diamore, we generally accept that assorted business offerings being offered by a bona fide farm operation such as tours, weddings, wine bars, et cetera, et cetera. These activities we accept as being protected by the agritourism statute. How or why does he consider farm stays to be different? So that's probably be me. Aren't farm stays equally protected from being regulated by his department or just like any other agritourism activity? Perhaps that's a question for the Department of Agriculture along those lines. And I would think if your statute doesn't address public lodging establishments or public food service establishments, you very much so would fall within the realm of needing regulatory licenses on your property for those things. And with that being said, I imagine that's my best answer to that question. I'd be happy to take more questions or discuss that further. The next one is, does a licensed food service establishment on a farm require a public water supply? Yes. And that kind of goes back to my question along the lines of having to get your water tested and meeting minimum standards. If you're going to have a public water supply, if you're going to be serving the public, if you're going to be having the public lodge with you and stay with you, then yes. I do see the question of RVs is more of a zoning question. I would tend to agree. And I have another one here. Is a barn on a farm considered a building licensed by the Florida Building Code? I would think if it can be occupied, right? That's one of our big things associated with buildings recognized by the Florida Building Code is whether or not it meets occupancy and whether or not the county looks at it and recognizes it as being able to be occupied by people. And so I would steer you back to the county along those lines to just make sure that it falls within an occupancy category. If that's the case, then I'm not certain I would know the difference between a barn or somebody's individual house, other than the fact that you might have live animals in there at some point or another, or them bedding up. I've seen different versions of barns, different versions of houses. Let's see here. I'm looking at another question here from Mr. Walker. The difference is we have a statute that protects us from duplication of regulation. I'm not aware of a statute that protects other entities offering overnight stays from duplication of registration. I'm not certain I completely understand what you're asking, but I would be happy to try to address it further. And maybe that's along the lines of the Florida Department of Agriculture. I would certainly encourage you, if there are broad protections associated with agritourism in the Florida Department of Agriculture, that you talk directly with them. The Florida Department of Agriculture, their Division of Food Safety, they too regulate food service. And along those lines are the people that license all the grocery stores, convenience stores, food processors, and other types of food processing facilities in the state. So they're very familiar with it, but I would think that they would also be aware of anything associated with agritourism as well. So I'm looking at another question or point here. Ag statute exempts zoning per se. Since overnight bedding is preempted to the state, the local zoning is moot, correct? Difficult for me to say. That might be a discussion that you would need to have with your local zoning authority or your county. Sometimes they want to stretch their authority and their regulation a little bit. Sometimes they don't. But I would think they're probably the best people to take up with it associated with the zoning. How do we define occupancy? We don't. Now, when you're looking at some of the bills that are currently being associated with vacation rentals, they talk about trying to regulate occupancy and how many people you can have in one vacation rental. It's part of what people go to the argument of is, hey, you can get a place on the beach, but you can fit 18 people in it, and it's only like 1,000 square feet. At some point in time, there's a determination by the county or municipality that that's a safe capacity or not a safe capacity. So that's currently being debated, but the division of the department right now does not have any impact whatsoever on your occupancy. A lot of times the fire departments and building departments will, because it goes towards, well, the occupancy of a building and the safe entry and exit of the building itself. So we don't have an opinion, but should you decide to try to get a vacation rental, boy, let me try to figure out here. We don't regulate the number of people that you have inside your vacation rental. We regulate the number of units that you have. So if you have one house that sleeps 20 people, we're going to give you a license for one house. If you have 5 individual motel rooms that on a combination sleep 20 people, we're going to give you a license for 5 motel units. Okay. So understand that we license by the unit. We don't license by the number of persons. Mr. D. Moore states, statute specifically states any agriculture related activity consistent with a bona fide farm. So we consider farm stays to be just like any other activity, weddings, etc., that might be hosted on a farm. The statute doesn't list any specific activities. It just says any. I'm not familiar with broad activities or rights. We could certainly go back and talk to the Florida Department of Agriculture and see. So many of your questions seem to vary between, whether it's considered to be an agritourism farm and it's permitted under agritourism rules, and whether it's permissible food service or public lodging activity associated with the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. I think absent of a defining revelation by the Department of Agriculture in which they're able to help explain some of these things, we would probably look at it in a broader sense, requiring licensure for your public lodging and for your public food service needs. I'm looking at another point here associated with Sarah Luther. I'm going to read it and except as otherwise provided in a section notwithstanding any other law, local government may not adopt, enforce a local ordinance, regulation, rule, prohibits, restricts, regulates, or otherwise limits an agritourism activity on land classified as agricultural land. Understand. I must say, I can't necessarily say we get a lot of complaints that people on agritourism properties are doing things unlicensed. So I'm certainly not trying to find fault with it. Mr. Frost says counter your local authorities like to insert themselves into the regulatory mix, and sometimes this becomes antagonistic as the farm is viewed as a wedge issue. My question is, both lodging and food service licenses is a local governing authority sign off a prerequisite for granting a license? I would say only as it's associated with zoning. So if zoning does not allow you to be there, then I would caution you about applying for a license. Know that when you apply for a license, we're not going to ask you for a zoning certificate. We're not going to ask you for your business occupational certificate. You're going to get a license with us and only us. And so the municipalities, the counties tend to focus a little down there more on their own, in the sense of, you know, what they're going to allow where and under what circumstances. I have a lot of sympathy for you in the sense of overregulation and the crossing of different jurisdictions, especially when it comes to city, counties, and things like that versus the state. You know, one of the things that we're constantly explaining and dealing with is how to, you know, how to best navigate with your local municipalities and your counties and the regulations that they put forth. Know that the department and the division, and when you read the statutes, it's very strong when it talks about preemption language and the type of business and activities that are preempted to the state and to the department and to the division. And when it comes to public food service and public lodging establishments, those are all very much so preempted to the state and preempted to the department, preempted to the division. And so I say that in the sense that there are broad protections there for our licensees. Know that we're happy to have them. It seems to be important to most everybody that writes the regulations. Counties and municipalities aren't crazy about it. They tend to fight with us about it because I think they would like to have more control over the business and licensing activities that sometimes happen within their areas. But with that being said, that's our role in the business regulatory world, and we're happy to represent it. I see Peggy Green mentioned that a termination was generally 150 square feet per person. That doesn't sound too far off of the numbers I've been hearing with the vacation rental bills. So, you know, start adding that up, especially if you start trying to do things like put bunk beds in one room. You know, one of the things that's become very popular with vacation rentals is they will have one room with as many as like 6 or 8 bunk beds in it. And it's neat, that's fun. But at the same time, you could be running into like 150 square foot per person problems if that's what you're having to stick to. But I would steer you back to your local fire department, your building department, and they can certainly help give you some more guidance along those lines. Mr. Frost says wedge means opening the door for abuse by marginal operators. Oh, okay. Well, certainly, I certainly would not promote marginal operators. And I would think that the public food service and lodging industry as a whole, not on private farming land, has plenty of wedge operators too. It's not unusual for people to get in fights and arguments about it. But I guess most things I have to say is we all need to make room for everyone as best as we possibly can. Tends to get hard as our state gets bigger, well, more and more populated, but the size doesn't get any bigger, does it? Let's see here. Zoning. It's nice to know that ag classified land is exempt from zoning according to statute. Probably be something that would be helpful to you to point out to the local municipalities if they're trying to force a zoning issue on you. I would think that would be very helpful in creating your particular standing as a point. I have another one here from Mr. Frost. He indicates as a 2 COP license include food service, or is that a separate license? So 2 COP, I believe, is beer and wine, correct? And so my question to you would be, think you're probably looking to serve it to your guest, right? I do believe on the beverage side of things, you know, you kind of have a package side of where you can have sales, and then you can have what's called a consumption on premise side of sales. And so when you're talking about a 2 COP, that's called 2 consumption on premise license, beer and wine. It's always been my understanding that it's the special food service license that you can get associated with restaurants that really has the main trigger associated with food service. So some 2 COPs, you might need to serve a little bit of food, but it's not necessarily measured. If you're looking to serve food, full liquor, under the special food service license associated with that division of alcoholic beverages and tobacco, I believe the trigger is, it used to be 150 seats. I think it dropped, or it was on schedule to drop through legislation this past year. So it might be a little bit less, but you have to have 51% sales food service. That's in order for you to sell full liquor inside of that establishment, which would be on your property. So 2 COP, I do believe it is substantially different, or much less of a bar. Might not have to serve food at all. I'm looking for another one here from Mr. Diamore regarding farm states. I'm trying to clarify. I read that agritourism statute is saying that licensure for many activities at your department traditional licenses are not required by an agritourism operator on a bona fide farming operation. Trying to understand if you read the agritourism statute yourself and consider whether or not your agency is supposed to be regulating agritourism related activities. I will need to read through the statute again, and I think that that's a very point to make with me. One thing that I do not want us to do ever as a division or a department is to overextend ourselves. Know that when we're talking about regulated activities, we have meetings with ourselves, the Florida Department of Agriculture, the Florida Department of Health, Children and Families, Elder Affairs, multiple other agencies, just to make sure we are not crossing our paths as much as we possibly want. Dual licensing and over licensing and over regulation is not something we are interested in. Should it be a statutory regulatory responsibility on your property associated with your activities, then we're happy to take care of it. And Mr. Diamore, I will be happy to share my contact information with you, and we can again talk again later if you would like, and I will review the agritourism statutes more and see if I can get further clarification for you. Ms. Luther, why you don't regulate this directly, maybe you have knowledge or context. One of the requirements of a food license to have a permitted well or septic. Yes. Our farm is so old that both were placed prior to permitting records. How does one go about permitting antique systems? Could be a challenge, but I would probably say start talking to the Florida Department of Health. I do believe that they are the people that are the primarily gatekeepers associated with wells and septic systems. Once they start turning a little bit more public, it turns over to the Department of Environmental Protection. So with that being said, it might be something that you want to stop and reach out to both of those agencies and talk to them a little bit about. I'd recommend the Department of Health right off the bat, because they tend to handle a lot of the smaller systems. Environmental Protection gets looped in on a lot of the bigger ones. But older systems could be challenging because the requirements that were put in place when they were developed and installed is different. And what is my contact information? So be happy to share that with everybody. My email address is also my name. I'll tell you what, let me type it in type it in the chat box here. Right, what I'm giving you all is my email address, and then that's also my direct line. So I ask you to not distribute my phone number, please, but I'm happy for any of you on the call to contact me and ask questions. You're going to reach me right at my desk. I don't have a receptionist or another person that answers that phone. What statutes exempts agriculture from zoning? I'm not certain I know that, Mr. Frost, but maybe maybe some of your other people on the call could help you with that. Let
Yeah.
me.
Carl, that's usually not covered by zoning.
Okay. And the statute only limits local regulation. This is a state agency. Well, good point, Sarah Luther. Sounds like we're learning a little bit along the way. I will still be happy to stop and read a little bit more about the agritourism statute too. Mr. Walker has said it's also the intent of the legislature to eliminate duplication of regulatory authority over agritourism as expressed in this section. The sentence doesn't differentiate between local regulation. It talks about duplication of regulation. Okay. And along those lines, Mr. Diamore says my contact information didn't. Oh, that was a direct message. I probably need to send it to everyone.
I just included yours.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I'm not a well-tuned Zoom user all the time, but I understand your questions, and I'm going to be very upfront with all of you on the call. I'm not interested in over-regulating any farm or anyone in particular. Our regulation grows immensely year by year, and quite honestly, it's difficult to just keep up with it. You know, it's keeping up with the staff and the people to keep going with it is challenges in and of itself. So please know that I'm not interested in over-regulating, and I don't want to over-regulate. I think it's the kind of thing when we have to stop and look at. I think that when we have to stop and read the statute and review it, it's probably the kind of thing that we need to stop and look at legal counsel with too. But happy to do it, and I will do that as well. And with that being said, I think we have 1 minute left. So Mr. Frost indicates usually it's the local authority that's the obstructionist. So can a local authority obstruct a license application? I don't know if they're not required to sign off on ours. So now whether or not you're zoned to do the business that you're doing, I imagine is another question. And so with that being said, I'll leave that question for another time. But I certainly welcome you and be happy to come back and talk with all of you again. I've really enjoyed this, and I appreciated the conversation.
Well, Stephen, we've really appreciated your time today. You've answered a lot of questions that have been popping up amongst our membership. Thank you very, very much. And I'm going to pass it to Sarah for our little ad on our next webinar, which is in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephen, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
We are having our next one in March, and it's on employment onboarding. We have Jordan Utzman from the Santos Farm, and she's going to discuss, especially as you start onboarding your temporary employees and volunteers. So she's doing a webinar on that. So go ahead and sign up for it.
And I have her look at it because it's due today at 5, right?
And with that, I will say goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
I just sent it to her and she's reviewing it. I got